I will call the study session of the Newport Beach City Council for November 12th, 2008 to order. May we have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that Councilmember Rosansky is absent.
Okay. First item on the calendar is current business, clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilwoman Gardner?
Yes, number 5, which is the committees. The Newport Coast Advisory Committee is on there, and I think it should be since it's achieved its mission. But we haven't had a meeting of the committee. We're trying to put together a meeting. That won't matter, will it? If we sunset it, we can still meet informally and come back with if they want to do a mission. Okay.
Okay. Councilman Curry? Councilman Webb?
On item 4, the interim funding reimbursement authorization for Oasis and Sunset Ridge Park, I'm kind of a little bit confused. If we have the money in our general fund right now and we spend it for design and engineering and all that kind of stuff, why do we need to borrow money to pay back that money when we're going to end up having to pay interest and whatever else on that money later on? Why? I mean, it's spent. Why do we want to borrow more money than we actually need to have?
I think Councilman Curry could probably provide you a better answer than I would, but I would say that we don't have to do that. This just gives the City Council the opportunity, or makes available to the City Council from the start of a project, that any expenses that go into that project, if we do sell bonds for a portion of it, we could include the whole cost, including reimbursement for the general fund that took place. So that decision hasn't been made. It will be made by the council as to how that funding will take place. But this just keeps that option available to the council.
Okay, so this doesn't commit us to doing it. This
Absolutely
just says
not.
that we can do it if we determine later on that we want to do it.
It just makes it available.
Okay, it's a good thing.
Okay. Councilman Hen?
Yes, one question, and then also something that I want to pull for later on. With regard to item 18, supplemental item 18, the CAD site that's been, that we're going to look into, would such a CAD site also be usable for Rhine Channel cleanup disposal?
That is a good question, and I think Chris can provide an answer for that.
Thank you. I'm Chris Miller.
Excuse me, do we have any extra copies? I didn't see a copy of that.
That is a supplemental item that came out on Friday. Item number supplemental 18. We'll make sure that you get a copy of that. But Chris?
First off, I can't remember what CAD stands for.
CAD stands for Confined Aquatic Disposal.
Okay.
And just to briefly explain what it is, it's basically a large pit would be dug somewhere, might be in Newport Harbor, might be elsewhere, where all the contaminated material would be deposited in that pit underwater, and then a cap would be put on top of that, 2 or 3 feet of clean material. So certainly when we were looking at this, it does include the sediment from the lower bay, but if everything works out right, it's possible that something could be designed that it would also include the Rhine Channel material.
Because that's really the key impediment to cleaning up the Rhine Channel is where to go with the
Yes.
contaminated material.
We have several options on that table, apart from this discussion, but it includes land disposal, CAD, and a couple other options, so yes.
Okay. Leslie, did you have something?
No. If I could just add, though, it is documented that the Rhine Channel is very warm, if not downright hot in certain spaces. And if there were an abatement order from the Regional Water Quality Board, we would have to respond very quickly. And if we don't have something lined up, which we would want to do for other purposes, then at that point, inland trucking might be your only option. And from what I understand, OC landfills are not taking sediment due to the salinity, the high salt content. So it could be very expensive to have to truck it at that point. So the answer to your question is yes, that would be correct.
Okay, and then with regard, thank you, Chris. And then with regard to item 12 on reserve adjustments for internal service reserves, I did want to just let you know I was going to pull that for further discussion later this evening.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Daigle?
I have no items to ask questions on at this point, but I did want to pull number 4 because I think it's important to establish for the public what it is that we are doing and what we're not doing, so there isn't any confusion down the line in terms of what this resolution grants us the authority to do.
Okay, and I have no items. Okay, so our first discussion item is the Balboa Theater status report. Mary?
Well, thank you for inviting me this evening to give you an update. Councilman Henn, if you will dim the lights. Thank you. We currently are looking at the project in 2 phases. And the first phase, we're saying at this point, is fully capitalized and completed, and it consisted of feasibility study, preliminary plans, seismic strengthening, soils and other necessary tests, government process, including the Coastal Commission, and the initiation of our Season Without Walls programming. That was a $3 million phase, and again, we're calling that phase complete. Our second phase is going to be a $10 million fundraising over 4 years. It will include the final design of the theater, building the theater, sustain and operational costs through the first year of operation. It will also build in an initial endowment, and we will develop the programming for once we're in full operation. Just to bring you up to date since our Coastal Commission experience, a lot has been happening over the last 10 to 12 months, and I just want to run through a few things rather quickly if I can. We recruited an experienced development director to head our capital campaign for the $10 million. His name is Mark Stenros, and he has an extensive arts and fundraising and marketing background. We contracted a theater architect, John Sergio Fisher and Associates, and I stress the word theater. It became very evident to us that although we're on a 5,000 square foot print, we are a very, very complex project, as all theaters are. Just to give you a little background on John Sergio, locally he is engaged with the Orange County High School for the Arts to design their new theater. He actually, or his firm was the firm that was retained by the Laguna Playhouse when they did their renderings for their new theater and new theater complex. He was contracted by the Samueli Theater to actually correct some of the sightline issues that they had after they were designed. And he's also been retained by the Orange County Performing Arts Center to act as an expert witness as they deal with some of the issues through the design of the new concert hall. In addition to that, he has built theaters all across the United States and abroad, and that's all that he does is theaters. Lots of renovations and lots of new theaters as well. And I'd have to say that his focus seems to be on the small to mid-sized theater. So he really has a strong breadth of knowledge in building theaters. We're very pleased to have him on board. We also established and updated our campaign goals. Obviously, our construction numbers were outdated. We have updated those. We have initiated an overall fundraising goal of $10 million with an interim goal of $1.5 million by this June 30th. We initiated a capital campaign committee, and we are bringing on board, or have brought on board, the likes of the caliber of a Tom Nielsen, who is a former president of the Irvine Company, and I'm sure many of us are familiar with Janet and Walkie Ray, who have made a huge difference in philanthropic projects in Orange County. We continue to collaborate with our local arts organizations. Our Season Without Walls is going to be launching its 3rd year with a subscription base of a little over 100, and it continues to raise funds for our project. And just to give you a kind of a feel for the types of collaborations we're getting with these arts organizations, We're putting on programming that would normally cost anywhere between $100,000 and $150,000, and it's costing us $12,000 to $15,000. So these arts organizations are being very, very generous as they support us in moving forward in our endeavors. We continue to expand our board and build our campaign cabinet. Our newest member to the board, we welcome Marian Bergeson. I'm sure you are all very familiar with Marian, and she has already been a tremendous asset to the organization. Just recently, a little over a month ago, we hosted an all-day leadership summit. Nancy, thank you for attending that, where we invited 3 distinct segments of our community. Industry professionals, those architects, engineers, and contractors to get their advice and input on our project. We received input from the likes of Bob Fernandez, who's the lead architect at C.J. Segerstrom & Sons. Disney Imagineering was represented by the individual that actually manages the construction of all the theaters for Disney worldwide. Arts professionals, the likes of Jerry Mandel, who is the retired CEO of the Orange County Performing Arts Center, Dean Corey, the president of the Philharmonic Society, Ralph Opasek, who's the CEO of Orange County High School for the Arts, Bob Bassett, who is the head of the Film School of Chapman. Just to mention a few, I can safely say that every major arts institution was represented at our leadership summit. And the last category were the community leaders representing government, the corporate sector, and philanthropy. I think it says a lot for the organization, the fact that these folks showed up, and I think even more important for you all to hear is some of the things that they said to us at that summit. Certainly the key word that we heard over and over again was the word need. So as I just run through these, keep that in mind. I think that's very important when you're looking at trying to build a sustainable project. The symphony has said over and over again, they need a smaller, less expensive venue in order to try new and different programs. Trying new and different programs is very important for their organization as they look at long-term sustainability. The Barclay Theater has repeated over and over the numbers of artists that they turn away because they simply don't have the space for them at the Barclay Theater, and they're looking for a small to mid-sized theater to perform. He says it very clearly when he says there's a need for more small performance space here. The Arts Commission certainly recognizes that Newport Beach is underserved in arts venues, and I'm sure you all have heard that. From an education standpoint, Bob Bassett with the Film School at Chapman stated that the theater could fill their need of providing a venue to showcase their student films. And following right on that, Ralph from the Orange County High School for the Arts made it real clear that students need to see their work valued. And it helps them when they can get off a campus environment and go out into the community, into a professional venue. It makes what they do feel more valued. David Muller with the Nautical Museum needs a venue in addition to his space to expand their educational programs. From the corporate and business side, we had event coordinators, business representation, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And we kept hearing a common theme. Companies coming into Newport Beach are looking for space at the water, at the beach. Companies are looking for nightlife in Newport Beach. Local businesses are getting tired of the hotel model and are looking for more interesting and innovative spaces. So at the end of the day, it certainly was very clear to us that the need is there for a venue like ours. After we listened to these folks and a lot of the research that we've been doing over the course of several years, we have come up with a new design for the interior of the theater. It is a highly flexible space. It meets the needs of all of these folks who have different types of programs they want to use the theater for. And it helps to provide a more sustainable future for the theater. It involves telescoping seats, pneumatic platform system that goes up and down, and it still includes a rooftop deck.
You'll have to explain to me what a telescoping seat is.
I will. I'm actually going to show you. But I think what's important is if we were to have built the theater that we had planned 6 years ago, it would be very out of date already today. You know, we were looking at fixed seats. Today we're not. We were looking at a fixed stage with a fixed proscenium. Today we're not. We were looking at very expensive catwalks that are very restrictive. Today we're not. Today we're looking at building a theater that's a theater for the future that should be able to live many, many years beyond today. Here's the first look at the telescoping seats, and if I can point here, the seats are fully pulled out. They hydraulically go back and stack up right here under 2 to 3 rows of fixed seats. So there'd be 2 to 3 rows of fixed seats, and these go right back and stack up here. Many years ago, you would have seen it like a basketball auditorium. And even 5 years ago or 3 years ago, the seats were hardly something you could sit in. Today, it's hard to tell the difference between the seats that they're showing in theaters that are retractable from the fixed seats that you see in theaters. In fact, Mayor Ed, I think you'd be very pleased to know that they're a lot more comfortable than the seats that are in the Samuel A. Center. So,
Mary, where is the stage on this picture?
the stage is right here. Well, let me move one forward. I think it'll be a little bit clearer for you. This is I'm going to try to go through just 3 or 4 demonstrations of how the theater can be used for different ways. This is a very traditional theater setup. The stage is raised here, so you can see right there it's raised. It's not flat, it's raised. We no longer have a fixed proscenium. We're creating a proscenium through drapes, which means we can make it up front, up back, bigger, smaller, or not at all. We have a full fly, which is nice. And the old catwalks are gone. We now have this grid, which you can actually walk on. The nicest thing about it, it creates a very, very flexible venue for lighting. This is more of a movie setup. So you see the seats are all the way down, but now you see a flat floor. There's no reason to raise the floor for a movie. This is actually, these drapes would be pushed all the way back and would be framing the screen. In this situation, this is kind of interesting. This is where we talk about the stage that can go up and down. The nice thing about it is it can go up and down in 7 different areas. So in this particular setup, we filled up almost the entire stage with tables, and there's a little table back here as though there was a panel of speakers. So we've only raised a portion of the stage, and we're using the entire rest of it as just a flat floor to put more people in the audience. The other nice thing about the stage is when you look at an orchestra, typically orchestras are tiered. The frontmost part of an orchestra, they're on the lowest, and then they're tiered up and tiered up and tiered up. The stage will automatically do that. It'll either go all the way up or up in tiers, so we don't have to bring in any kind of additional platform system to do that. And in this particular picture, it's just showing the floor is entirely flat, the proscenium is gone. You could use this in virtually any way you wanted. I mean, you could have a dance in there. You could have cabaret seating in there and have a performance. You could set it up for a meeting and have a meeting structure. You could use the screen, which is in the back, to do some sort of presentation. But I think basically what we're trying to demonstrate is we want to be able to use the theater in any way somebody else needs to use the theater. We want to build it so that they can use it in any way they want. So it just creates more opportunity for renting the theater, which then creates a greater sustainable theater, I believe.
Mary, with regard to the telescoping seats, can they be partially telescoped, or do they have to be all in or all out?
They can be partially if the stairs come from the back down,
Yeah.
but in our particular situation, we're not going to be able to do that. So they will be all the way in or all the way out.
Okay.
With the exception, there are 2 or 3 rows that are fixed, as well as there's some seats along the side here, which are kind of hard to see, but a few little balcony seats. So really, for example, if you were going to use this type of setup and have a stage up here and have some sort of performance and have cabaret seating, there could be those that choose to sit in these back 3 rows and not sit at a cabaret table, and in fact, they could do that. This is just another view, kind of showing you the overall effect where these kind of go back. You can now see the seats on the side. That would be the projection room back there. Hopefully there will be a glass hole there so that we can actually project through. And of course, there's our rooftop deck with, I asked them to put little umbrellas in to make it a little more festive. But we still enjoy the concept of being able to utilize or enjoy the views around us and have some sort of outdoor space that, again, creates a separate space for people to use. Any questions about the theater itself?
What's the maximum number of seats when you
300 seats.
300.
We were very specific about that number, by the way. Apparently, according to certain codes, it makes building the theater a little more cost-effective. Challenges. It wouldn't be fair to say the project is just going to sail into the sunset with no challenges, because there certainly are challenges. And I think one of the interesting things about our project is how, over the last 5 years, we've, made our way through and up the community and had lots of input into our decisions. And I think what's important about where we are today is the individuals that we're talking to today are individuals that can and do give to capital projects in Orange County. And so when we look at the challenges that they're putting forward to us, they're very, very important messages, I think, not only to us but to the community as a whole. They're imparting their experience in the projects that they've been involved in and flagging issues that we should make sure we all get our arms around and can deal with. And I just say the first one is, I think the Balboa Village as a whole, there's nothing new here, but the concern is there needs to be a synergy within the entire village. It can't just be about the theater. It can't just be about the theater and the Nautical Museum. There's got to be an environment that supports these two projects, our project and the Nautical Museum as well, in order for us to all be sustainable. So I think, collectively, we need to find a way to work on that particular challenge. Parking, I think you guys hear it as much as we do. So I know we're trying to address it somewhat. I think a bigger scope probably down the line needs to be addressed. And the big unknown is this current economic climate, obviously. I think, Sharon mentioned the opera. Certainly was very sad to see the opera go away. I'm hoping the opera comes back, but we just don't know. It's untested waters what's going to happen in this particular economic climate. I will say this, that today I attended a lunch by the Community Foundation, and they were very, very positive in their outlook for the arts in particular, and did a very good job conveying that to some very, very important people. There's also a history that says in these types of economic times, people tend to focus very locally on their charities. So, I would just bring that up.
Mary, would
Yes.
you like to draw a distinction between, say, Opera Pacific and the way they operate and the way the Balboa Theater is envisioned in its operation? Because I do think there's a good distinction there.
Yeah, very, very clearly. And you can really even go broader by saying one of the great things about the arts is that the arts are based on tradition. And one of the most crippling aspects of the arts is that they can't seem to buck tradition. And one of the things that the Balboa Theater has done from the onset is say, we want to build a sustainable model. And to do that, we think we have to operate in a way that's very different than the arts have operated in the past. And especially as a young and small organization, it was very important that we be embraced and fit into the general arts population. So we are all about a collaborative model. We are all about how can we work with the symphony, how can we work with the opera, how can we work with Barclay Theater, how can we work with Orange County High School for the Arts, how can we collaborate together that we can provide something that actually can help them grow and prosper. And we started that testing ground with Season Without Walls, and it has certainly proved to be a very beneficial model, not only for us, but for the arts organizations that we're collaborating with. And I'd follow that all the way through to our design. 6, 7 years ago, we were looking at a very, very different theater. And today, this theater looks different because we're trying to listen very, very carefully to what people need and create the venue for that need. So we're looking very, very thoughtfully to sustainability issues as opposed to what traditionally someone would do to build a theater.
Mary, would it also be fair to say that you've also been very thoughtful about the design of the theater, that once you capture your initial capital nut to build it and equip it, it should be an efficient theater to operate by comparison to the old models, I would guess.
Absolutely, much more so. In fact, we're even looking to a green element. So, actually in the very beginning there was a thought, oh, you can't go there, it's going to cost you a lot of money. But after some study, theaters are very expensive to run. They burn a lot of electricity. And there's a lot that can be done there in lighting especially that can save a lot on the long run. So very definitely, very efficient.
And then I'd like to comment on the first two items up on the screen there for just a moment. Fortunately, we've already got a parking initiative that's well underway in the city in a half a dozen locations, including Balboa Village, and we've got a steering committee that's moving forward to try to identify fundamental parking solutions for Balboa Village because it's critical infrastructure for the success of the Nautical Museum, the Balboa Theater, and the retail element in the village that's had such a hard time sustaining itself. And then with regard to the village itself, I've been working along with David Muller with regard to their effort to revision the Nautical Museum. They're getting pretty close to finished with that process. And once they complete their revisioning and are in a position to talk about it publicly, it sounds like you're certainly in a position to talk about your vision publicly. It's my intention to form a citizens advisory committee that will revision all of Balboa Village in a complementary fashion to those two key anchors in the village, so that we really do have a view of what environment we're intending to create, and hopefully one that will be very compatible with what you're doing.
Great, thank you.
That was one of the things that came out in that all-day seminar, that people were envisioning that very thing, of this very vibrant village with perhaps some galleries because there would be enough more restaurants, and it became a real, almost like an art village, which is we don't have in the city.
Yeah, and my thought right now, and of course all of this is subject to a lot of public input, but my thought right now is to pair that with a new version of the fun zone, if you will, that doesn't rely upon arcades and little play rides that a lot of us fondly remember from the years past, but that is sort of a new updated version of a family fun environment that will have an educational component, hopefully family programming in your facility.
Absolutely.
For entertainment, and make it a really good place for parents to bring their kids for an afternoon.
Great.
Or even an evening.
Just in closing, if I can, our new season is coming out. It begins in January. We have collaborated with McGilvery Freeman Films to show an IMAX film at the Irvine Spectrum Theater. We'll be showing a new film that is yet to come out on Van Gogh. February 5th, we're collaborating with the Laguna Playhouse for Around the World in 80 Days. And March 2nd, we will again be at the Samueli Theater collaborating with the Pacific Symphony. And in May, our hopes and dreams are to find a facility in Newport Beach to present the Triada Guitar Trio in conjunction with some guitar students from Orange County High School for the Arts. Can I leave these with you, Homer? So I'm sure you all want to subscribe. So, any other questions?
Any questions of Mary?
Mary, I guess I have a question, and that is that the fundraising has been going on now for 6+ years, and $3.5 million has been raised for the first phase, and the next phase is going to be $10 million. What is really going to be done different? I understand that you do have a professional fundraiser on board, but have the annual costs kept pace with the contributions that are coming in?
Yeah, I think to answer your question, first off, what's going to be handled different? Before we got into the Coastal Commission, there was a big disbelief that the project could ever even happen. And that became very clear to us, pretty quickly. There's a different model for running a capital campaign than running annual fundraising. And we did not enter into that capital campaign mode. We were running more of an annual campaign and trying to get programming out there to demonstrate what we would do, because there was a disbelief until we cleared the Coastal Commission. That's why you see such a rapid fire of activity right after getting through the Coastal Commission, because all of a sudden there was we were kind of armed with something to say, oh no, it really can happen. And until we had that, people just did not believe it was going to happen.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Okay, the is there any public comment on the Balboa Theater? Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to the next item, which is the review of the business license procedure.
Mr. Mayor, I have conversations with various council people from time to time, because you get people talking to you, and you get emails about certain situations where people are saying they don't have a business in Newport Beach, and yet we keep hounding them like they do. So I know that this has been a painful situation for some council people from time to time, and I've talked to Glenn and Dennis about it, and asked for a presentation on how we can lessen that burden and try and do a better job of making sure that those notices that we send to people are, we feel like there is a stronger reason to believe that they do have businesses in Newport Beach and would be subject to a business license. So Glenn, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Omer. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. It has been 4 years since we've been before council to discuss our business tax program, and we do know that you get a lot of contact from constituents about our business tax enforcement efforts. And I've got 14 slides that I want to share with you this afternoon, and then offer any answers to questions you may have. I would also suggest that business license tax, we administer a bunch of different tax and revenue responsibilities for the city, and business license tax is the only one that we administer where the city staff is directly responsible for affecting the collection from the taxpayer. So sales tax, property taxes, transient occupancy taxes, collected by somebody else and forwarded to the revenue division. Business license tax is collected directly by city staff, and Monique Navarrete is our licensed supervisor. She and her staff are the ones that are in direct contact most frequently with your constituents about business tax obligations in the city. We enforce business license tax pursuant to Newport Beach Municipal Code, and the code defines a number of things. It requires that a person in business is obligated to pay the tax. It defines both person and business. It requires a separate business tax payment from each separate person, each different location of the same person perhaps, and for each different type of business conducted, even if it's at the same location. Municipal Code also provides that business tax is not a regulatory function of the city. This is designed solely for general fund revenue purposes. Municipal Code also defines what evidence of doing business is, and that's kind of key to our efforts in terms of targeting, identifying those businesses that we think may be operating but not subject to the business, but not paying a business tax. The business tax rates in the city are as follows. An in-town business with a seller's permit has an annual rate of $151 plus $8 per employee, and they are capped at $755 annually. An in-town based business with no seller's permit pays $151 plus $5 per employee with a cap of $1,510. About a third of our businesses in the city are residentially based, and they pay a flat rate of $143. There's no additional charge for employees. An out-of-town based business is also a flat rate payer, $227 a year, and they have a similar count. About a third of our business licenses are for out-of-town based businesses. And if you're a out-of-town based business operating through a commercial mail receiving agency, mailboxes, et cetera, United States Postal Service, et cetera, you may have a business license, and that rate is $151. Business licensing, business tax, is a constant effort. We see about a third of our business community leave every year. They either don't renew or they cancel their business license. So it's not a static set of businesses that we're dealing with. This is a snapshot from the end of fiscal year 7-8, and in that year we had issued 5,410 new licenses. We had 5,337 renew, about 28% of those. The balance, 4,250, didn't renew, and they may, after they receive some of our notices, decide to renew, or we may eventually hear from them that they, like the 20% from last year, end up canceling their license. We rely on about 32 different business indicators to identify who might be conducting business in the city that has not satisfied the business tax requirement in the city. Some of those business indicators come to us from state agencies. In fact, the largest databases that we receive about business being conducted come from these state agencies. And I think it's important to understand some of the regulatory requirements that these state agencies have relative to businesses. For example, the Franchise Tax Board provides the city a file twice a year of all the businesses that have represented to the Franchise Tax Board that they're based in Newport Beach. The statutory authority for the Franchise Tax Board to provide that data to the city provides that the manner in which a taxpayer reports income to the Franchise Tax Board shall create a presumption for cities as to whether or not that taxpayer is conducting business or is acting as an employee. So that source leads us to believe that the taxpayer has represented themselves as a business. Prior to this statute, and this was adopted in 2000, prior to this statute, the city would go through a series of 22 questions that were developed by the Internal Revenue Service to determine whether or not the taxpayer was an employee or an independent contractor. State Board of Equalization, we have 4,500 or so registered sellers in the city, and that number changes constantly, and we get a file every month from the State Board. And Revenue and Taxation Code provides that those permits held by the franchise, issued by the State Board of Equalization can only be held by business entities actively engaged in business. So you can't hold a seller's permit and say, well, I'm not really in business or I'm not actively engaged in business. Moreover, they let the Board of Equalization know on their application where the principal place of that business is, and we contact those businesses that have held out to the Board of Equalization that their principal place of business is here in Newport Beach. Fictitious business names are filed with the county clerk. We get a file every month of those that have been filed, and similarly, they can only be actively engaged in business. They hold out to the county clerk when they do that filing where the principal place of business is, and they're also obligated by state law, if they're not operating that business, to abandon that fictitious name statement. And then the Secretary of State, we get a number of filings from them for businesses that have listed their principal executive office to be in Newport Beach. Very recently, we've been able to change a practice that led, I think, to a lot of complaints that council may have heard, a number of them that came our way for sure. If we got a lead source from the Franchise Tax Board, the Board of Equalization, fictitious business name filing, when we got that source, we'd compare it against our business license file and then generate a notice specific to that source. So if you had a fictitious business name filing last month, and this month you finally got around to registering with the Board of Equalization. Last month, we would have sent the notice out for the fictitious business name filing. This month, when we got the Board of Equalization records, we would have noticed that you don't have one. We just had a separate letter for the Board of Equalization notice, and so on, up to 32 different potential sources that you could have been notified for. We've recently, as of April of last year, been able to consolidate those separate sources and identify unique taxpayers that exist in each of the separate sources. So today, you'd receive one letter that would articulate the fact that you've got a fictitious business name filing, a Board of Equalization filing, and those things together have led us to believe that you're conducting business in the city and need to obtain the Newport Beach business tax. This is a calendar year representation of the number of notices that we transmit since 2003, and you can see that sharp decline that occurred here in 2005. We changed the system, and it's just coming out of this system in 2007 that we were able to consolidate those notices. So this is a period where we were in conversion from an old system to the new system that we're using that consolidates those leads to single sources. And the number of notices, while going up because we're coming in to using that new system, should not be as great as what we've previously had in terms of number of notices, because we're smart noticing, if you will, now. We think that the business tax program, we have the Fortune and Revenue Division to also administer the parking citation program, and we think that that's very similar in that we send out a notice and customers have an opportunity to argue their case. And we've designed both the parking citation appeals process and the business tax appeal process similarly. And I just wanted to give you some numbers to help you understand the scope of the work here. It's 75,000 notices we send out annually in parking citations, about 6,000 in business tax last year. Of that 6,000 notices, you can see, compare the number of first-level appeals that were rendered by those that have been noticed. In business tax, about 77% of the folks that are contacted on the notices will appeal those. 5% of our business tax or our parking citation customers appeal those. We have a dismissal rate that's a little higher in business tax than in parking citations, and the number that are upheld is about the same. The one significant difference I might add is that the amount of revenue that the city realizes annually from business tax is around $4.5 million compared to the $2.5 million coming out of the 75,000 notices that we do in parking citations.
Glenn, maybe you can take a few minutes and talk about how a notice might be dismissed, the process that one goes through.
I actually have a slide, Homer, that will get us to that. Preceding that slide, I want to show you a couple of the items that we've provided you a hard copy on because we didn't anticipate your ability to read this. But I'll come back to these after I talk about the process. The first notice, and that a copy of which you have in the packet before you, comes out of this new lead system that we have, and we'll send a notice out to the customer and we'll ask them to pay for the business tax or file an appeal that suggesting that the business tax, they're not subject to the business tax. That first appeal looks like this document. So we've sent out a notice, they call us up and they say, I don't think I need your business license in Newport Beach, I'm not subject to it. We'll ask them a series of questions that we've prepared that we would ask them over the phone, but we try not to spend the time that it takes with the 10, 11,000 customers that we'll notice each year over the phone. So we ask them to fill out this form, submit it, and return it to us. We've recently added the ability to do this online, and today we've been able to do that for a couple months now. About 10% of those that appeal the business tax notice will go to our online request for a business tax review. Taxpayer fills this out, signs it, sends it back to us, and we have people that that work for Monique who will review the information that's been provided by the taxpayer. And I think there's some very important questions. If council could take a time to take a look at the questions. These are very important questions that we ask the taxpayer about what their business presence in the community is, how much nexus do they have. We find thousands of businesses every year that, for whatever reason, will indicate that Newport Beach is their business location to some government agency, when in fact they find it a matter of convenience to have their home address listed with the Franchise Tax Board or the Board of Equalization. They're actually located in Riverside. So this questionnaire gets us very quickly to those kinds of issues, and we're very quick to dismiss those kinds of notices sent to taxpayers that aren't actually conducting business in Newport.
I have a question, Glenn.
Yes, sir.
I own a restaurant in Orange. Let's say that for my seller's permit, I just happen to list my home address as my business address, or you pick up my home address somehow, and I say, okay, but I have a restaurant in Orange, we only sell food in Orange, I don't do business in Newport Beach. Would I be exempt from the business tax license?
We wouldn't subject you to the business tax in Newport Beach. Moreover, we'd thank you for misrepresenting the address with the Board of Equalization, because the
So you get the
1% will
sales
come our
tax.
way, and we make a lot more in sales tax than we do in business tax, which is another important feature of the business tax. We don't know if the business is here for sales tax purposes unless we've registered them for business tax purposes. So no business tax for your restaurant operation in Orange.
So if someone's, what about a situation where I own an apartment building in Orange, but I show my business address here in Newport Beach? Am I going to get, do I need a license for that?
We won't subject you to the business tax in Newport Beach unless you have any more nexus than that. So if your apartments are being managed out of the city, rent's not being paid to the city, you don't see potential renters in the city, we don't have the nexus sufficient to require the business tax in Newport.
Okay, thank you.
Also, on this first appeal, they haven't had to pay anything?
That's correct,
Okay.
yes.
However, that first appeal does tell them to pay it, and then appeal, doesn't it?
No, the first notice, and you've got a copy of that notice in your packet, doesn't, we ask you to pay it if you think you're subject to it. If you think you're not subject to it, we ask you to submit this business tax review form that's also in your packet. I might add that we've taken advantage of the recent acquisition of the public information manager, and Tara's had a chance to help us edit that first notice, and she offered some very good revisions to that particular notice. If you disagree, however, with the determination from the business tax review, we will ask you to pay the business tax, and you may appeal then our determination with a hearing officer. And once a month we have a hearing officer comes in and hears business tax appeals. This hearing officer also hears parking citation appeals and administrative citation appeals. So once a month, we spend a day with our hearing officer, and taxpayers that are aggrieved by the termination of the first level of review may argue their case before an attorney who acts as the hearing officer for the city. So at that point, Councilman Webb, yes, we would ask them to pay to play, if you want to.
Actually, I'm looking at it, although you, I guess, don't have to send it, and you are encouraging them to, if you find that they do owe or they do have to apply for the license, or their business does need a license, that they will get penalties for not filing on time. Is that?
Well, that's a very good point, and I thank you for bringing it. The biggest problem that we have with business tax processing is that the taxpayer won't stay with us in terms of responding timely to the notices. And when our system is computer, automated, and it'll click off the number of days, 30 days in the case of that particular notice, and after 30 days, the tax, because Newport Beach Municipal Code provides for penalties after 30 days, the tax will include penalties, which can be as much as 100% of the tax liability. So we do encourage taxpayers to respond to us in a timely fashion. If you're going to appeal it, then you need to file the appeal and submit the tax payment, and you can avoid the penalties.
Do you cash the check?
Beg pardon?
Do you cash their check?
We do cash their check.
Even though they're appealing? So
That's
you'd have
right.
to actually refund the money, not just
We
send
do.
a check?
That's right.
Okay.
Glenn,
Well, because, you know what, but that's not exactly what the form says. It says no license required, your check and application will be returned. So you're actually holding the check until?
It's depending how
Uh-huh.
If we're holding checks over the weekend or so, we will get them deposited so that they're not left in the office, and then we will immediately refund with a city check. If we can review the form and it's obvious, they've amended their filings, or it's in our error that we sent them the notice, and the check has not been cashed, then we will send them their actual check back.
Okay.
Glenn, how many appeals do we handle on an annual basis?
We had 450 last year, 7-8 fiscal year. It's about 7.5% of the notices that we transmitted. And 5 of those ended up going to a hearing before the court, which is I beg pardon, 5 of those went to hearing, right? 450 went through the business tax assessment review. So out of the 6,000 notices we sent, 450 of those went through the business tax review assessment. 5 of those subsequently went to a hearing officer. 1 of those 5 was dismissed by the hearing officers. So 4 were upheld, 1 was dismissed by the city, and 1 in that year actually went to court and filed their appeal to the court, which is the last stage here. Like parking tickets, if you're aggrieved by the decisions out of the first 2 appeal processes, you can file with the court. There's a $25 filing fee with the court, and if the court upholds the imposition of the tax, they hang on to the $25 filing fee. If they dismiss it, then the city's obligated to refund that. We had 1 out of the 6,000 notices go to court last year.
How many of the 450 were found in favor of the applicant?
Why don't you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
There we go. About 3/4 of them. Okay, thank you.
And I'd like to just add
Come
on
on
the
up.
dismissals, sorry. On the dismissals, the city may have had the right to send the notification. The taxpayer maybe filed something incorrectly, like Councilman Rosansky said. He had a seller's permit, he has a restaurant in Orange, but he told the board that he was in Newport because he wanted to use his home address. If he amends his filing with the Board of Equalization and he shows us evidence, then we write it off, which gets a dismissal. So it wasn't so much that we dismissed them because the city was in error, as because the taxpayer made an amendment to their filing, such as the Board of Equalization, Secretary of State, Franchise Tax Board. They've told other agencies that they're in Newport, but when they've explained it to us, then we say, well, you need to file correctly with the other governmental agencies and provide us evidence, and then we will dismiss your case, so we don't uphold the tax on that, on those issues.
So in my case, I would have to actually change my filing with the state board.
You would
then.
have to amend your filing so that you're correct with the state and Newport Beach.
Okay.
Glenn, I get a fair amount of complaints about people who have family trusts or other trust accounts that somehow get flagged as a business. How do we handle those?
The questionnaire is designed to help identify those, and it depends on the nature of the trust and what its purpose is. So we try to pull out enough specifics about why the trust was formed. We have lots of trusts, and some of these are clearly for business purposes. When the trust has set up as a corporation with the Secretary of State, then we've got a different kind of operation than a family trust. So it really depends on how many of those business indicators we pull out of that business tax review form, indicating how much the trust may be doing. I would, this year we've had, through the council, through council members, had 5 complaints out of the 6,000 notices that we've sent, which is about 0.2, a little less than 0.2%. And what we found in those, I think we have a slide in that regard. What we found in the, we had a slide on the number of complaints. What we find are those folks that fail to respond and contact council typically have a 2.5-month turnaround from coming up with a determination, whereas the average turnaround that we have is 30 days if you've gone to a hearing. if you just go through the business tax review assessment, we turn those around in 14 days. So we're pretty efficient. If you can let the system, let the taxpayer communicate to the revenue division what they're doing, and that happens in the business tax review, we'll get that turned around in about 2 weeks on the average. If they end up even going to a hearing officer, 30 to 45 days is the average time spent on those. 2.5 months on the 5 complaints that we had directed to us from council, because it takes people out of the process. And we're happy to work directly with council in helping taxpayers understand the program, but it typically creates a little more angst for the taxpayer because it takes a little longer to respond to them. Ignoring us has consequences, and because these are programmatically established, these notices, if they've ignored them after the first notice, they get a little stronger worded second notice, and penalties will be imposed for having ignored us during the first 30 days, and that's set by ordinance. Ignoring us again for 30 days will ultimately result in our production of an administrative citation being delivered to the business. That then has the tax, the penalties, and now an administrative fine at $100. So ignoring the process and disengaging is not really helpful in coming up with a resolution that is cost-effective for the customer. And this is just a snapshot of the business tax revenue for the last 5 years, and you can see that we haven't increased business taxes in the city of Newport Beach since 1996 was the last tax adjustment made in the city, and business tax revenue is doubled in the last 5 years. And this has really come from utilizing those sources and doing a more efficient job of targeting taxpayers that have fallen under the radar. This year, so far, we're at $1,400 or $1.4 million in business tax revenue. We're tracking consistent with last year's total general fund revenue from business tax at about $4.2 million. With that, I've got a lot of other slides that I can show you, but I think that's the essence of the program. I'll be happy to answer any questions that council might have.
Glenn, if I may, before we get to the questions, though, I thought the last time we talked, you were going to do something in terms of a difference in the number of indicators that were necessary for you to send out a notice.
That's largely what's come out of that business tax review form. So between being able to pair to a like entity the number of business indicators that we have, what we found, for example, in 2001, the city first began receiving information from the Franchise Tax Board, and we only had that Franchise Tax Board source. We know that 3/4 of the businesses that are represented in that Franchise Tax Board filing aren't going to be subject to a business tax in Newport Beach. The old system had us sending a separate notice out for the Franchise Tax Board source. If they had a Secretary of State filing, they were a corporation, for example, we'd send that in a separate notice. We've been able, through this new system, to combine like notices. So today we're targeting businesses with 3 and 4 business indicators before we work down to the single source.
Well, I'd just like to comment that council members are not exempt from getting these letters, and I received one and filed my appeal, and within the 14-day period it was settled, and I did not owe a business license fee, so that does work.
Did we say that you were a lobbyist and that's why you needed a...
I'm not quite sure what you called me.
Okay, any other questions of Glenn or Keith?
Well, Glenn, first of all, I would compliment you because it sounds like you've taken to heart some of the customer satisfaction issues here in terms of streamlining the notice process so people get fewer notices and trying to streamline the form so people have a better understanding of what it is that they need to do to either establish that they are or are not subject to the tax. I think we need to continue with that. I think we need to make this a more sort of customer-friendly process as we see these appeals and try and get on them so that we get clarity quicker in the process for people, or at least so people understand where they're what their appeals are. That there seems to be a fair amount of time in the people that I've talked to just explaining to them sort of what the process is and how to go through it and all of that. And part of it, I'm sure, is frustration on their part, in being sort of caught up in the system. I do think we need to get some clarity about who and who is not eligible. I know real estate agents who don't practice in Newport Beach sometimes get caught up in this, and that becomes a source of frustration for them, along with people with family trusts and some of the other examples that we've talked about. So I think if we've got a sort of a customer-focused approach to these issues, we'll get these 3/4 of the people who are not subject to the tax resolved faster early on, and I think leave a better feeling in everybody's mouth about it. And it sounds like you're making some good steps towards moving in that direction. I'd just like to encourage you to continue to do that.
I thank you for that, and I think that, if council will point customers to the system and ask them to relate any grievances, frustrations they have, we can learn from that, but I think relying on the system has been pretty effective for all but 0.2% of the customers that we can contact.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Glenn. Anyone from the public wish to address the council on this? Just state your name for the record when you come to the podium, please.
It's Edwin J. Cowan, C-O-W-A-N. I don't know whether the subject matter that I want to bring up is appropriate at this meeting, which I have never been to one of these meetings before, and this is a study session of only those items that are on the agenda. Is that correct?
The only thing that you can talk about at this point is the business tax license item that was just discussed.
All right. Then I will not go any further. I will attend the meeting this evening.
No, there's an opportunity, though, for public comment.
Yeah, well, there'll be an opportunity once we get past this, and you can comment on anything that's not on the agenda.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I'll just wait for you?
Well, yeah, I guess you might as well stay up here because I don't think anyone else is going to want to get up and speak, so sorry to put you through that.
That's okay, no problem. All right, we can get on to this next stage. We had intended to go to the meeting this evening to bring up a particular subject. I'll try to limit myself to 3 minutes' time, so we won't bore you on. I've lived in Newport Beach for 36 years. I love the area. And we have some thoughts on new methods of transportation. Namely, we started a nonprofit corporation called the Dynamic Traffic Solutions. And we've been studying public transportation for a couple of years now. We have been showing our ideas at the Capcoa Green Convention at the Long Beach Convention Center. There were 70 exhibitors there, and we attracted much more attention than any of the other 70 exhibitors. What the subject matter really is that we've come up with is a concept of picking up cars on the freeway in the Diamond Lane. You've got a description here where one application is 6 automobiles being picked up, a lounge car in the center, and 6 cars beyond it, kind of like a large bus, about 300 feet long, so that you can drive your car into this thing on the freeway, step out of your car into a lounge, go the distance, whether you're going 50 miles or 100 miles. When you get to your destination, you just walk back to your car and drive. The implications of a lot of things on this, you aren't using any gasoline on this thing. You're reducing air pollution unbelievably. The economics of the whole thing is such that we feel there would not require 1 cent of public money to operate this, because the return on investment of anybody who gets into it, there's about a 20% annual return. This isn't really the subject I came totally to talk to you about. We have decided to go further on this thing, and we are actually building a car train here in Costa Mesa. It's a 2-unit affair. It's 40 feet long, and it carries 2 automobiles. The objective is to illustrate to the public and to public officials how we can load a car onto a train in less than 1 minute's time. not only one car, but we could load 1,000 cars if we were all set up for it in 1 minute's time. And what it is described in our literature. We have a setup whereby the cars swivel units that swivel out 25 degrees so your car can drive directly into it. It moves in line. When it does this, the platform tips slightly about 8 degrees so you can drive into it. And so we decided the best way to really move ahead was to build one of these 2-car affairs and show the public really how it works. So we are well on the way of construction of it. The 2-car unit is 11 inches high. It's that close to the ground. That's the top of it. It's 40 feet long. It's 6 feet wide, and it can carry 2 automobiles.
Your 3 minutes is up, so maybe you want to wrap up.
Yes, all right. We think a wonderful place to a home, at least a temporary home for this, would be your Newport service yard. It's safe there. You've got the room, and where we could demonstrate it to the public by maybe having once a week a demonstration to public officials. So that is what we were proposing. That's why we're here today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd suggest you contact our city manager on this. That's him sitting right there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anyone else want to comment on anything not on the agenda? Seeing no one, we'll adjourn to closed session.